project is how to make a slab cylinder. A slab cylinder is basically a piece of clay that is wrapped around a cylindrical object, and then later on you roll out another slab of clay and catch a base. This is just a simple form that is something cylindrical, okay, something round, something taller. Slab cylinders are basically, if you take a mug, that's a slab, that's a cylinder. A bottle, a wine bottle, a pop bottle, anything like that, those are cylindrical forms that can be used to wrap a piece of clay around and then later on attach a base, and if you want to, you can make a handle and attach that to make it a mug or a pitcher or something like that. So a cylindrical form is just that. It's not rocket science. Before I begin any of my projects, I like to gather up all the tools and the materials that I might use during the creation of that project. So with that in mind, let's take a quick review at what it is I have in front of me. I have a plaster bat, which I'll use in conjunction with the construction portion of my slab cylinder. I have a banding wheel. This is a nice versatile tool that just helps in spinning the project while I create it. I use the plaster bat. Plaster is porous, so it draws moisture out of the clay naturally and slowly. And I like to use that just to handle my project on the plaster bat rather than handling the project itself. So I'm going to set those tools aside, because I don't need them right at the very moment. I have a plastic bag which I'll use to cover up my project with, so it slows down the drying process. I have a paring knife, just from the kitchen. This is a very versatile tool, probably one that I like to use more than anything. A typical tool that would come with at a pottery shop would be a fettling knife. This would come in a tool kit that you could buy. That's also very versatile. Okay. I have a wood modeling tool. We'll see this in use. This is a very versatile tool for creating pieces, projects. I have a toothbrush, an old toothbrush that I'm going to use to apply slip. Slip is just watered down clay. This works like the glue when you're putting stuff together, when you're putting two pieces of clay together. This works like the glue. So I will need that in a little bit. I have a couple of pieces of meter stick here. These pieces of meter stick are the same thickness, and they will help me control the thickness of a slab of clay when I roll it out. I have a rolling pin. This is a special made one for working with clay. It happens to be solid. There's no dowel rod in the center like a one that you have at home in the kitchen might otherwise have. Those work just fine. These are made more specifically for working in a clay shop. So that's a big rolling pin. I have a cylindrical form that I'm going to use to wrap my slab of clay around. I have a piece of paper towel that's going to serve as a barrier to separate the clay from the plastic form. Clay will stick to plastic. Okay, so we want to make sure that the clay doesn't have the opportunity to stick to plastic, so I just wrap that piece of paper towel around that plastic. So it's important to wrap a piece of paper towel or some kind of a barrier around your form. There are a number of other things that you could use as well. Paper towel, piece of newspaper, very easy to use in this case. A piece of paper towel is very easy to use in this case. So I'm going to set that aside. And then what I also have are a couple pieces of clay. The two pieces of clay that I have, as I start out, I need one piece of clay that I'm going to use to make the cylinder itself. I have another piece of clay that I would use for the base and any other decorative objects, such as a handle, that I might want to apply to my piece of clay as I work. So as I set that aside. So as I begin, I'm going to set up my tools here that I need. I'm going to first just kind of flatten out the piece of clay that I'm going to use as the cylinder. I'm going to start by flattening that out a little bit. You can throw in your clay. I know that based upon my shape, I need something that's somewhat tall, but I need to have enough length to go around it. Please give consideration to both when you are rolling out a slab of clay. Take a look at the shape of the cylinder that you're using as a form. your piece of clay that you're rolling out has to be long enough and wide enough to cover that form, if that is your intent. Otherwise, if you don't roll it out the correct way, you're not going to have a piece of clay that's going to be functional for what it is you desire, and then you're going to be looking at plan B. So here's, I gently throw the clay. I'm flipping it each time, and I'm throwing it towards me so I can stretch it out. And I can see that it's beginning to take on enough shape. Right now it has some height that's going to cover that, and I'm working on getting it to be long enough. So now that I have that started, I want to take and gently roll my slab of clay into a thinner piece of clay that will be used to wrap around the form that I've chosen for this particular project. Okay, I've rolled it down to meter stick thick. That is approximately 3/8 of an inch, by the way. Now when I'm done with those tools, I like to set them aside because I no longer need them. Now I can take my form and I can see how my slab of clay, and this is just by example, I can see how my slab of clay fits around. And for my purposes, that's pretty good at this point. So what I do like to do also is I'm going to go ahead and trim away what I know is going to be excess, and I can set that aside. If I have a large enough piece, it might just work for creating a base or a handle. So now I can bring this around and I can see where that's going to match up as well. Okay, and I can see here that I'm not going to get quite enough out of this for the height that I was hoping for, but I can see where the ends are going to meet up, and I can see here that if I use this is kind of neat. I'm just going to use this texture that's on this cylinder. And now, because I don't quite have enough height, remember this is just a cylindrical object. It does not need to cover, the slab of clay does not necessarily need to cover the form that I'm using. If that is what I desire, if I want a bigger piece, then obviously I need to start with more clay. Because I have a smaller piece of clay, I'm going to have a shorter cylinder in this case. So now what I can do is I'm going to go ahead and match this up, and I'm going to cut what I know is going to be a straight edge that's going to serve as my top. And I can turn this, and I'm going to cut again another straight edge that I know is going to serve as the bottom. And this is, all I'm doing here is just kind of eyeballing to make sure that it's relatively straight. This does not have to be exact. So now what I've also got here is I'm going to go ahead and I kind of like the texture that this cylinder has on it. It's kind of a honeycomb texture. I'm going to go ahead and roll that back on here, and that's going to be the outer surface of my cylinder. Now, because I've already textured that, now I can go ahead and I'm going to lay my piece of paper towel on here, and then as I lay my cylindrical object on it, I'm going to go ahead and bring my ends together, and I can see how that matches up. Now when I think of matching up the clay, matching up what's going to become the seam, I like to think of one of two things. If I want to have an overlap, think of a button-up shirt. It overlaps slightly on that seam. I want to think about here, if I'm overlapping, I want to overlap my clay no more than 1/2 inch. I have found that 1/2 inch is pretty ideal for that. 1/2 inch is about a fingernail worth of width. So if I wanted an overlap, I'm going to go for so I want to overlap no more than about 1/2 inch. My other option is to make it look seamless like a zipper. And in that case, what I would do is where the clay is overlapping, I'm going to find that overlap and simply take my knife and I'm going to cut that straight away. And then I'm going to remove what's on top. And I'm going to remove what's underneath, and that's going to leave me with a seamless, kind of like a zipper, that's going to leave me with the opportunity to create a seamless joint. So that's what I'm going for with this one. Now I'm actually ready to do that, So let's kind of rewind just a moment. I have 4 straight edges here. I have a top edge, a bottom edge, and I have 2 straight edges that are going to become the seam. I have a piece of paper towel that's serving as a barrier, okay, and it doesn't matter in this case which way this goes. Whatever your barrier happens to be, it's fine. The idea is you just have to separate the clay from the plastic, from the form, whatever it is you're using, so that your clay doesn't stick to it, okay, as that would be bad. So as I bring that up, I can see that those are going to connect nicely. Now I want to go ahead and bring in my slip and add a little slip in there. So that I can get that sealed up nicely. Just a layer of slip with the toothbrush, and I push that together. And that's basically together. I can take my wood modeling tool, here's our first use for this, and I'm going to gently blend the 2 pieces of clay together to make it look seamless on the outside. This helps to strengthen the form that you're putting together. And that's probably a good place where I'll actually put, unless I can go back and revisit my texture, and this becomes a consideration, is when you texture the outside of your form, okay, you have to be cautious when you're handling it so that you don't obliterate that texture. Okay, so this just has a very subtle suggestion of the texture that I've added on here, and that's okay. All right, at this point, if I wanted to reinforce that, I could again put down another piece of texture. Maybe I want to change my mind, and what's actually a good suggestion is I have a little piece of texture that I'll use here. This is a nut ball, and once I have it formed around my cylindrical object, I can go over it with my texture and create that pattern. And that sometimes works more advantageously than rolling or applying the texture in advance, because you still have to handle your project and you risk removing or minimizing the texture that you work so hard to add. So sometimes it's better just to go ahead and wait until a little bit later to add that texture. Okay? So now I have the basic form, and in terms of making a slab cylinder, we can think of, you know, kind of a 2-step process. Step 1 being I rolled out and formed the cylindrical wall. The second component is I now need a slab base. Now, I started off, I had a block of clay that I was going to use for that slab base. Well, it turns out I don't need that, because for what I'm doing here, and when I think of a step process, depending upon the instructional environment, I might think of day 1 and day 2. What can I accomplish on day 1? What can I accomplish on day 2? So as we think about step 2 of this process, is we would take a piece of clay and roll out a slab of clay, again, meter stick thick, that we would use to form the base of the cylinder. So I'm going to set this piece aside, and using the piece that I already have, I have that already rolled out. Okay, so that's working for me in my favor. As I set my cylinder on there, I can see that it is large enough already to make the base. So now what I want to be able to do is, this is what's going to help me. I'm going to set all of this on top of the plaster bat, which is on top of the banding wheel. This works out nicely. Now, what I need to do here is I need to be able to remove my cylindrical object, and I'm also going to remove that piece of paper towel that I had in there. Now, remember too, I just want to mention that we're thinking of step 1, day 1, step 2, day 2. If you're doing this on consecutive days, your cylinder wall is going to be a little bit stiffer than when you started with. So as opposed to trying to create it all at once, you have an advantage of working on a day 1 and a day 2 type of basis. Or work on it in the morning, set it aside, and then finish it in the afternoon. It's nice to have your clay a little bit stiffer when you come back and you add a base or add a handle. So for purpose of demonstration here today, I've now removed my cylindrical form. I've rolled out what's going to become the slab base, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use my toothbrush and some slip, and I have a little visual mark on here of where that wall is, a mark of where the wall is going to attach. I'm going to go ahead and add some slip on there, and I do so in a fairly liberal fashion. Slip is just watered down clay, so it's okay to have a little bit more. Better to have more than less. Now what I want to do is go ahead and set my cylinder form on top of that base, and then I can take my knife. I want to make sure too that before I do any trimming that I have my cylinder at the bottom, I have it as round as I want it to be. You can see here where using the banding wheel and plaster bat is helpful. I've been able to round that out nicely. Now I can take my knife and I can trim this around nicely. What works really well here is I am not touching my form any more than I have to. I've added that. I want to take an opportunity with my wood modeling tool, and I want to be able to seal up that inside seam. So with a point of resistance on the outside, I'm just going to rub my wood modeling tool up and down a little bit on the inside of that seam to seal it up. I'm going to do something similar at the very bottom to seal that up. I'm going to turn this upside down, and I'm going to gently pat. My wood modeling tool again. I could use a wooden spoon, I could use a ruler, my little meter stick, anything that's going to help to pat that down and make sure that that bottom is stuck. Now what I also like to do is gently press inward on the base so that the center of my bottom is a little bit, from this perspective, it's concave, it goes inward. When you turn this upright, it would be convex, so it would be domed a little bit on the inside. It helps to seal up the inside seam of the base. And then you can also make sure that you take and smooth out or blend in that little bit of excess clay that you had from trimming, and blend that in. Here your thumb works nicely. You can also use your wood modeling tool. We learned how to do that when we were making a coil pot. You just want to blend that in and make sure it fits nicely. Smoothing it up what you can later on. But in essence, at this point, you've just constructed a slab cylinder. Roll out a slab, texture. So it rolled out a slab, sealed up the seam, added some texture, rolled out a slab base, sealed that up, and now you just need to set that aside and let that dry. So here I would put my bag on it so it dries slowly, and I can set that aside. So thanks for watching.